All right, let's talk about the impact of the impact of cerebral palsy on occupational performance. So, as we know from our readings, cerebral palsy is due to some sort of event at birth. If it was in utero stroke, if it was an anoxic event during the birthing process, whatever that was, by the age of 2, these children will have been diagnosed with cerebral palsy. And cerebral palsy is not something that goes away. Rehabilitation will help with some of the byproducts of cerebral palsy, so tone and um, cognitive deficits, feeding deficits, position and mobility. So all of those things we work with, but we don't fix cerebral palsy. So this is across the lifespan, across genders, across ethnicities. Like, this is a diagnosis that you will see everywhere. And of course, we will always see some sort of um, other diagnoses with cerebral palsy. We will see vision deficits because this is a neurological event. There can be visual deficits. We'll see cognitive deficits. We'll see impairments across all occupations. So what do those impairments look like? How is occupational performance impacted? So depending on how severe the cerebral palsy is, it will have varying impacts on all areas of occupation. So for your person, young child through older adult, ADLs will look different across that lifespan, depending on the severity of the cerebral palsy, right? So if you have somebody with a relatively mild form of cerebral palsy, where maybe it's lower extremity weakness is the only impairment, let's say. So as a young child, they may be independent completely with ADLs, but as they age, perhaps the weakness becomes they're not able to adjust to the weakness in their legs as they age, and then they might need more modifications and adaptations as they age to perform, let's say, lower body ADLs or standing showers. With somebody with maybe more moderate to severe cerebral palsy, maybe they have lower extremity and an upper extremity involvement. So let's say their left side is their impaired side. And now they're a young girl who is starting to menstruate. And what does that look like for being able to manage her menstrual products and disposal and, putting it on and taking it off and being able to clean herself effectively if she's got that hemiparetic side. And then as she ages, what does that look like? Maybe it becomes easier as she modifies and adapts. Maybe it becomes harder as she ages, based on whatever factors. ADLs in terms of sex and sexuality, right? Sexual activity, that is an ADL that is part of our scope of practice. It's in our OT practice framework. So what does that look like for a young man who maybe has hemiparesis on one side and he wants to engage in sexual activity, and a young woman, of course. But what does that look like for positioning? Maybe they need some modifications and adaptations. So health management, what does that look like for being able to manage their medications and let's say insulin with if they have a needle, maybe we have to modify and adapt to a different way to inject the insulin because that might not be a reasonable thing for them to be able to do. Rest and sleep, do they have pain due to their tone or spasticity? What does education look like for the kiddo who is in a power chair and who has visual deficits? How are they able to actively engage with the teacher? Work, how does one get in and out of work, and what does that look like for whatever job it is that they have, how do we as the OT look at modifications and adaptations for this client across the lifespan? Play and leisure, social participation. So you can see how it really is dependent on the person, what those occupational performance impairments might look like or impact might look like. And then pretty specific to CP, articulation. So this is really looking at communication, both from being able to speak and also to receive information. So a child with cerebral palsy, or any person with cerebral palsy, might have articulation deficits where their speech is very dysarthric and it's hard for them to understand. There might be drooling. So what does that look like in terms of communication? And working as a team with the speech therapist to determine what is the best, maybe augmentative communication device. But as the OT, we're not really necessarily looking for from the communication aspect, but how they're able to engage with the communication device. Or is it positioned correctly on their wheelchair? If it's not on the wheelchair, how is it positioned when they're lying in bed so that they're able to still engage with that communication device and communicate with whomever it is that they need to communicate? Respiration. Are they sitting properly in their wheelchair to be able to have those deep inspirations and expirations? Sensory processing. You'll find that a lot of humans have sensory processing disorders. And what does that look like for the child with CP or the adult with CP? There might be physical endurance or stamina deficits, which then impact all areas of occupation. Feeding and swallowing, those could be areas that are specifically impacted for people with cerebral palsy. So how is we, the OT, set up the environment so that they can feed themselves or safely be fed? Urinary function, incontinence, how do we help them manage staying dry or being on a toileting schedule? And digestion kind of goes with respiration, feeding. Are they positioned in a way that they can effectively digest? So I hope that was helpful. Any questions? Please don't hesitate to reach out.